Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'll be doing a fireside chat, navigating H-1B layoffs and mitigating the impact. I'd like to start off with some housekeeping announcements. We'd like to remind you that Ascend is a safe place for our community. Please practice discretion when engaging with the speakers and each other during the program. We do have chat activated, so feel free to say hello to your fellow program viewers. And we also have the Q&A open. So if you have any questions for our speakers, you can type them into the Q&A feature. We ask that you conduct yourself and express your opinions in a conductive and courteous manner. If you have any technical questions, you can ask me, Marco Soto, via the chat message. As you probably heard, we are recording, and so we will be putting this up on our YouTube channel later. And now I'd like to introduce Rupa Sethigal.
Thank you, Marco. Before we begin, I would like to ask our audience to please take a moment of silence for the victims of the utter devastation in earthquakes at Turkey and Syria. Just for a moment, please. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to this session. My name is Rupa Sethu. I am the National Director Chapters. And this is actually a national program, but I have to say it originated from a couple of our chapters, and you'll see why in a minute. The topic of navigating H-1B layoffs and mitigating the impact is extremely timely, and in recent months, we have all seen or experienced, either directly or indirectly, the mass layoffs that are occurring in various industries at the moment, actually. Even though early on it felt like it was within the tech industry, it definitely is spilling over to other industries as well. We wanted to get people together. We wanted to understand what the implications are at a human level. We wanted to support the affected professionals in our network. And we also wanted to provide resources to them in terms of actions that they can take immediately, as well as in the longer term, and just understand how to mitigate the impact of these mass layoffs that are occurring. So with that said, I just wanted to make sure the numbers were understood as well. So in 2022, close to 150,000 people were laid off by about 1,000 tech companies. These are not small numbers at all. The trend is expected to continue, is continuing in 2023. We see that every day. And we estimate that tens of thousands of these impacted workers are Pan-Asian H-1B visa holders. And they have a limited amount of time to take action, to get re-employed, or to change their status, or whatever the case might be, before they have to actually leave the country. As you can imagine, there are a lot of human elements to this. There are families impacted, there are children in the mix. So I am actually very excited to hear what our guests today have to say. We do have a fireside chat planned a little bit later on in the program. But first, I would like to introduce you to a special guest. Next slide, please. So Kunjan Mehta serves as the co-president of Ascend's Connecticut and Westchester chapter. He is also a partner at Grant Thornton in their New York asset management practice. He's had multiple years of experience with public accounting. He also serves as the national lead and executive sponsor of Grant Thornton's Pan-Asians and Allies Business Resource Group. The reason I invited Kunjan actually to speak was really to give him a few minutes to share his personal story of something that occurred quite a few years ago, actually. I'll let him take it, but it's a very compelling story. I'd want to set the stage with that as context for why we are doing this program. Kunjan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rupa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. As Rupa mentioned, I'm Kunjan Mehta. I lead the Connecticut Westchester chapter for Ascend. I have been involved with Ascend for a number of years now. What I'm going to share with you is a very personal story, obviously. And in my mind, the purpose of sharing the story is twofold, right? For anyone who is going through issues like this today that is attending, I think it's a good ending. So the idea is to, give you some hope, encourage you to have a positive mindset and things will work out. And then for anyone who is an employer, who's a friend, who's a colleague that, knows people that are going through immigration and H-1B and other issues, very important to be sympathetic and to ask and try and help out where you can, because there are implications, like Rupa said, that are much wider than one person. There's a lot that happens when you go through a visa issue or a change of jobs or you get laid off. So with that, I moved to the US in 2004, so it's been a long time. I moved to Grant Thornton, my current employer, in 2006 on an H-1B. And, we had a little bit of a roller coaster of a ride with the immigration. And I'm very thankful. Grant Thornton was an amazing support. Our firm was an amazing support to me, which is why I'm still here in the country, not at GT. But what happened is in 2010, there are two stories that I'll share, or two aspects to the story. One, in 2010, my wife was pregnant with our second child, and she was working at that time also on an H-1B. And her employer came to her and said, your visa is good, it's extended, all good. 6 months after the fact that we got a confirmation, we still didn't have the official documentation. And upon pushing quite a bit, actually, they came back and said, the attorney came back and said, oh, unfortunately, you're out of status. So here she is, 7 months pregnant, working, out of status for a few months, and not knowing that she was out of status. So we had to send her to India, full term pregnant, pretty much. She went to the US consulate, interviewed with them, left her job, converted to H-4B as my dependent. And they were, practical. They appreciated what happened and they let it slide and let her come back on an H-4B. A year and a half later, our attorneys for my H-1B application came back and said, oh, the green card application we filed for you, it didn't get approved. And I won't go into the details, but basically by this time, I had two kids. One was 5, another was a year and a half. I had, a house, I had a car, I had a job that I was working at, for 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it was. And we started, looking for options. So GT, again, was very supportive. I almost had a contract signed where I was going to work out of our India office and go back for a certain while so I could come back again in the longer run. While this was all going on, my house was up for sale for potential rentals. I actually took a check from a tenant for the money that they were going to pay me as a deposit. We had to go through, and this is very important for anyone who's going through this, I recaptured all the time that I had spent outside the country over the years that I had been here when this issue happened. So I got an extension through December on my visa. And I'm not, I think I'm not exaggerating this, but literally my entire house was packed in boxes. My house was rented out. I had taken a deposit check. My car was about to be sold on a Friday evening, 1 week before I had to fly back to India. So I had tickets to go back with my family, a year and a half and a 5-year-old kid. And the attorneys called and said, hey, we got your approvals. So it was, long story short, it was unnerving, nerve-wracking, there's a lot of stress that went into it. Thankfully, my firm was very supportive and they did everything they could to support me. They even went out on the limb and hired the country's top legal counsel only for my case so they could, retain me in the country and do the right thing, right? But that experience just, was unbelievably difficult. Thankfully, we have our green card now, but it was very hard at that time. And for anyone who doesn't understand the intricacies of this, it's very, very difficult on the family and friends and extended family and whoever you know. So I know I had 5 minutes. I think I took up the 5 minutes. I'm happy to stay on and share more details, but I think this should hopefully give people appreciation. I'm still here. It's been a good 10 years since that happened. I'm a partner at Grant now, and doing well. So people, don't lose hope.
Thank you, Kunjan. Appreciate it. There's a lot of stories of similar experiences in the chat that I can see. So clearly it resonates. Marco, can you share the slides, please? Thank you. Next slide. We're going to do a quick poll just to get a sense of where everyone is from. So we have, I believe, 5 questions on tap. This is a word cloud. So you, if you have your phone handy and you have the a QR code scanned in already, please use it to enter the industry that you work in. We'd like to see where everyone is from. We see professional services, consulting, financial services, very big there, banking, public accounting, IT, legal, communications, nonprofit, pharmaceutical, marketing. We have a nice cross-section of people in our audience today, with financial services and technology taking center stage. Nice. Okay. Well, these are industries that are very much affected by what's going on out there. So this is relevant to all of you. Thank you for participating. We'll give it another couple of seconds. Okay, that's fine. Next question. Have you ever been laid off on a non-immigrant status? For those of you who did not get a chance to scan in the QR code, I believe we have it in the chat as well as on the top of your screen. If you go to menti.com and use that code, you should be able to join in. So in our audience, most people are in the no category, which is fine, because it just means you're in a position where you can possibly support other people who are affected by these mass layoffs as well. Next question, please. This is more of a sentiment question. Are you concerned about being laid off as an immigrant? Okay. Next question. If you were laid off, did your employer offer advance notice in lieu of payment as part of your severance package? It's close between those for whom this is an applicable question. Interesting. Okay. Next question. This has nothing to do with your immigration status. It's more around, are you, an employer, open to hiring individuals on work visas and sponsoring their immigration paperwork? Thank you. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to set the stage for our fireside chat. This is what you're waiting for. Please welcome Ascend National Board Member Tariq Khan. Tariq is a published author, sought-after keynote speaker, and a recognized business leader who brings a combination of corporate and professional leadership experience along with academic learning. Tariq especially enjoys his role as an adjunct professor of marketing and leadership at NYU's SBS Graduate School. Tariq will be speaking today with Sophie Alcorn, who is a top 10 California immigration attorney, entrepreneur, and thought leader. She founded Alcorn Immigration Law, lauded the top immigration law firm for startups in California, authored TechCrunch's advice column, Dear Sophie, and hosts the podcast, Immigration Law for Tech Startups. Her mission is to help people harness their strengths, follow their hearts, find direction in their goals, and live their dreams in the US. Sophie has graciously offered us her time and her expertise to be part of this conversation. And I'm going to turn it now over to Tariq to get started with our fireside chat.
Thank you, Rupa. On behalf of Ascend, I'd like to thank all of our audience for joining us in the midweek afternoon. I know it's a very difficult time, but I want to thank everyone. And I want to thank our volunteer leaders, especially Rupa Setu and her team for putting this together, and organizing an event like this is not easy. A big thanks to Sophie Alcorn for her time, and during such a busy time right now, she must be very busy, but she really volunteered her time for Ascend. Before I begin my discussion with Sophie, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes real quick about Ascend. Ascend is the largest nonprofit Pan-Asian professional membership organization in North America. We are committed to drive workplace and societal impact by developing, cultivating, and elevating Pan-Asian leaders. We are a truly career life cycle organization, which is providing support throughout your career, from being a college student to full-time watching cricket or playing golf, whatever you prefer to do once you become a philanthropist or retire. We have over 65 professional and student chapters throughout North America, and I encourage all of you to become a part of Ascend. You can visit our website, ascendleadership.org. Now that I shift our discussion to the topic with Sophie Alcorn. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. And according to US CIS, there were around 420,000 people, foreign nationals, who are working in the US on H-1B visas. 75% of them come from India, about 15% of them come from China. And when you look at the overall pool, about 95 to 98% of them come from the Asian countries. So let's start with the expected mass layoff and the impact this is going to have on the American workforce. When many people like you and I get laid off, we go and find another job. There is no impact other than financial impact on our families, but there is no other impact. But when someone who's an H-1B visa, when they get laid off, let's put a real life scenario. Let's assume that I get laid off and I can find a job, and my options, I have 60 days grace period. So what do I do? What is your legal advice to a person who's being laid off, or at least have been on notice with 60 days?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tariq, for the question, and thank you to Ascend for hosting this webinar. It's such an important topic, and I'm so grateful for this education that you're sharing in the world, because following the U.S. immigration process legally traumatizes people. And I see that effect on the brilliant professionals from around the world who I get to work with day in and day out. And I know that a lot of people here, thank you for everybody who typed your answers into the questions. That's super helpful. Some of you have been laid off. Some of you are worried about being laid off. And so if you find yourself in that 60-day grace period, which starts at the cessation of your employment, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the questions, but essentially if your job ends and you're no longer working for a company that sponsored you for a visa, such as an H-1B or an E-3 or a TN or an L-1, there's a lot of visas in addition to the H-1B, but if you're in that 60-day grace period, you have to take responsibility for your immigration status, because nobody is going to swoop in and save you. This is one of the oddities about the US immigration system. You come here based on the petitioning and sponsorship of an employer. But the 60-day grace period, their job for helping you is done. And so you have to take proactive action and steps immediately to protect your and your family's immigration status. And so if you fail to take any action and you stay in the United States, you will start accruing, you will be an overstay beyond the 60 days. So you either have to physically leave the country, or you have to proactively apply for another type of immigration status, such as a change of status to become a visitor on B1, B2, or an F1 student, or if your priority date is current, or then you could file an adjustment of status to maintain your status. What most people do is they look for another job with another company, but it's really difficult to apply for jobs, get first interviews, get second interviews, receive an offer, negotiate, and have their company counsel initiate an H-1B transfer in that 60 days. So I'm recommending to a lot of people, at least file an I-539 change of status to B1 or B2 to just buy yourself that time runway of another 6 months so that you don't have to leave the country within those 60 days.
No, that's a great advice. So file that form, and that gives you a runway of another 6 months, or total 6 months.
Yeah, okay. So it's also super weird. You get to request up to 6 months. You're not allowed to work here. You're not allowed to earn money, but you're allowed to physically be here. If you want the B2 for visitor status, you can take your kids on vacation, or get medical treatment, or go to a meditation retreat and rebalance your chakras, right? If you want to look at new business opportunities, create a startup, look at new ventures, that would be an appropriate for a B1 visitor status, but you have to be very careful to only do the activities related to setting up and owning a business, but not working in the business. So you just want to be very, very careful with whatever you're applying for and the rules for it.
What is that form, Sophie, one more time? Rupa, if you can put it in the chat box.
It's the I-539 application for a change of status. And you'll want to make sure when you fill it out that the start date for the status you're requesting is during or immediately adjacent to the end of your 60-day grace period. And that's a legal calculation that you might want to talk to a lawyer about if you're unsure of how to calculate it. But let's just say you were laid off on January 1st, and let's pretend that 60 days would take you to the end of February. And then, so you would want your 6 months of requested status to start at the end of February or the beginning of March, whenever that 60-day grace period is over. Now, you're allowed to stay in the US for the next 6 months while USCIS is making a decision on that application. And then the nuts crazy thing is that right now it's taking the government a year to 2.5 years to decide I-539s, depending on your geography and the service center. So you're probably not going to find out whether it was approved or not until 2024 or 2025. So just whenever, make sure that you don't stay. Let's say you request from March 1st for 6 months. So you have to then take action before the end of that 6 months to change status again or leave and re-enter on another visa. But you're probably not going to find out from the government what ended up happening for that period until, retroactively, until much time has passed. So definitely, if you get a new job and they're going to transfer you back to H-1B, tell the company, hey, this is what I did. Here's my receipt notice. I'm in this pending status. Here's my visa options. Do you want me to leave and come back in? Do you want me to stay? And you can work out an individual plan with the company immigration lawyer at that point for how best to protect your status beyond that 6 months of B1, B2 requested period.
Great. So Sophie, as you know, that our agenda is very ambitious. We have a lot of questions, and we
So much to cover. Okay. Let's do it.
With your time.
Rapid
So
fire.
the question is, let's say if I get laid off, and what happens to my green card process? Depends on wherever I am in the process.
Yeah. So if you're at the very beginning and your employer is doing perm for the first time for you, it's abandoned, you're not going to keep your priority date, go figure out another company to sponsor you. If you already have completed perm and your I-140 was approved, congratulations, you have a priority date, you can retain it and you can apply it to any other green card process in the EB1, EB2, or EB3 categories. So your spot in line is secure, but you will have to restart the immigration process elsewhere with a new I-140 later. And if you have already reached the stage where your priority date is current and your I-485 is pending, as long as 180 days have elapsed since your I-485 was filed, you can use AC-21 portability to transfer your entire green card process to a new company for a same or similar occupation. No new perm or I-140 is needed. And hopefully you would be getting your work permit and your advanced parole travel document and combo card in the mail real soon. So you would have the freedom to travel and work based on your green card as well. So it depends on where you were in the process.
Got it. Okay, so let's be preemptive. And let's say if, what can I do if I'm currently on H-1B visa? And although I have not been laid off, but I'm worried about getting laid off. How can I protect myself, my non-immigrant status?
There are two big things that I think people can do to protect themselves. One is to self-petition for a green card without an employer. And this is not only based on like 90-day fiance marrying an American. There are two green card categories that allow you to self-petition. One of them is the EB1A category for extraordinary ability. The other is the EB2 national interest waiver category. You don't need to marry an American. You don't need to invest a lot of money. You can just do it based on your merits. Whether, which category makes sense for you depends on if you have a priority date, what country you were born in, and what your wait time is for green cards, and what professional accomplishments you have. But certainly look into whether, if you don't qualify now, you can do the things proactively to become qualified. I think the people on this call are brilliant professionals who are very accomplished. And so it's definitely within the realm of possibilities that you can become qualified to self-petition, even if you're not there quite yet. The other thing that you can do to mitigate and kind of have an insurance plan is you could actually look for a second concurrent part-time H-1B sponsoring job right now for another company. So if your friend has a small business and they need some extra help and you're a software engineer and you want to go work for them in addition to your current day job for 5 or 10 hours a week, check the employment laws of your state and what you signed with your current main employer. And you might have to disclose this to them one day that you have another side job. But let's say you get that second H-1B approved for 5 or 10 hours a week for this little company. Well, then if the big company that's your main employer lays you off, you're not in a grace period. You're maintaining valid status with the other little company. And then they could amend the H-1B to go up to full-time with them. Or you just keep working 10 hours a week or whatever it is until you find another company to transfer your H-1B back to. So that can be a very amazing option if you can set that up.
That's great advice, a concurrent job. Okay, so are there any ways that I can try to get a green card without relying on my employer?
Yeah. This is a little bit of what I touched on, the EB1A and the EB2 NIW. They're amazing green card options. And I've seen people who were product managers at a company, for example, go from not having any of the accomplishments to 6 weeks or 3 months later or 6 months later being fully qualified to self-petition. And so that just gives you and your family that security of not needing to go through the perm process again and waiting for another company to take over your green card sponsorship.
Okay. And what happens if, let's say, what happens to my spouse's EAD if I'm laid off?
So let's say there's a family with 2 individuals who are married and they were both born in India. And in the first scenario, one of them has an H-1B and the other one has an H-4. And the one with the H-1B has progressed through the green card process enough so that the H-4 spouse has work authorization. So the H-4 spouse's work authorization is based on them maintaining valid H-4 status, and valid H-4 status is based on the primary H-1B holder maintaining valid H-1B status. So it's a bit of a gray area, but the really conservative legal answer is that if the primary spouse is no longer maintaining valid H-1B status, then the dependent spouse would not be maintaining valid H-4 status and then would no longer be able to work. So I think it's especially important for families with a H-4 work permit spouse to look at options for that spouse on the H-4 work permit to have their company put them in the H-1B lottery now and try to find ways for their immigration status to become decoupled and independent of the primary H-1B spouse so that the family has more options.
Great. Let's say if my employer is open to hiring people who have been laid off on H-1B, what do I need to do about the process of sponsoring people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was thrilled in the polling to see how many people attending this webinar are from companies that are open to sponsoring people who need immigration processes and sponsorship done for them, whether that's an H-1B transfer or the lottery or a green card. So in general, if you're from a company that's wondering how you can help, and also, I mean, it's really in your self-interest because the people being laid off are brilliant and hardworking, and it's an amazing talent pool. But if you're interested in sponsoring immigration for the first time and you're new to it, or maybe you're gonna, talk to your company, a friend's company, about why they should consider doing this, some of the important things to think about are the sponsorship process for an H-1B transfer usually takes only 4 to 6 weeks to get going. Very young companies, small businesses, early stage tech startups, people that are often new to the immigration process, and sometimes they can be concerned that their company is too small to qualify to do an H-1B. But as long as the company has, it's a real company, it has a professional job, it's related to the person's educational background, and they have enough money to pay the person. I've gotten, pre-revenue startups H-1Bs approved where the company maybe only had $15,000 in the bank in a business plan. And okay, the software engineer was allowed to work 1 year while the company fundraised, right? But it was approvable, and the first and second employees of a company can obtain H-1B approvals. So as long as it's a legitimate business and opportunity, it's definitely possible. Also, employers are often wondering, okay, if I enter into the immigration sponsorship space, what are the consequences? What do I have to do in terms of a layoff? So this is probably good for everybody here to know. If an employer lays off somebody on an H-1B, they have to notify USCIS that the person's no longer working for them. So USCIS should find out that you're no longer working there. And they also are required to cover the cost of a return ticket back to your home country. So if you were laid off and you want to leave, you can get your company to reimburse you for your airplane ticket home. And then just as a company, you need to be prepared for that. But it is totally doable. And if you're a company that wants to hire somebody who was laid off, and they're more than 30 days into their grace period, and it's your first time sponsoring an H-1B, it's going to be a little dicey about whether there's enough time to file. So in that case, the company might want to look at also helping that individual get that change of status to B1 or B2 filed before the end of the 60 days, just to buy time and make sure there's a bridge between all of the statuses. And I will mention one more thing here that's important. If you're going from H-1B to another role at another company in an H-1B transfer directly, and you're maintaining valid H-1B status, you're allowed to start working at the new company as soon as USCIS receives that I-129 H-1B petition. They don't have to adjudicate it. You don't have to pay for premium processing. They don't have to make a decision. But as long as you get that receipt notice, you're allowed to start working at the new company. If you have to do a bridge to B1 or B2 status or some other type of status, you will no longer be maintaining valid H-1B status beyond the 60-day grace period. So if if it's May and you're 2 months into your B2 and you're still waiting for the decision on that, and then a new employer comes and wants to do an H-1B transfer, you'll have to wait until you'll have to get premium processing and wait for the H-1B approval to be able to start working in May or June at the new company.
Okay, great. So there are many entrepreneurs in the audience, and what if they get laid off? Are there any entrepreneurial routes or options available?
Yeah, there are a lot. There are several, and this is a great opportunity to, look at your own options for self-reliance. So we do a lot of H-1B transfers for startup founders in founding teams. It's very straightforward for a chief technical officer role at a startup. It can be a little bit trickier to do an H-1B transfer for a CEO role, although I have signs that USCIS is going to try to make that easier for entrepreneurs this coming year. A lot of individuals I know that are entrepreneurs who've been on H-1Bs at big tech companies for a long time, they actually choose to position themselves for O1 visas for extraordinary ability, especially people born in India and China. And this has several benefits. One is they no longer need to be tied to a single H-1B employer. It's very easy to be the CEO of a company on an O1. If you can get an O1, then it makes it a closer reach to get that EB-1A green card process started for a self-petition. And another really great thing about the O1 is you are allowed to set it up to have an itinerary of services. And one of the most constricting things for an aspiring entrepreneur who's on H-1B at a single company is they're not allowed to do outside work. You can't take contract work, consulting work, gig work. You're not supposed to be an advisor for equity or pay in somebody else's startup. And there's all of these opportunities. But you could use the 6 months of B1 status to do all of the business setup activities required to create a company that could then petition for an O1 for you down the road and then start your green card through that. And you could also do, volunteer work, writing, judging competitions, getting publicity about some of your past accomplishments. You could easily do all of those things while maintaining B1 visitor status and set yourself up to be essentially employed in your own company on a visa in the future. So I find those opportunities really exciting, and I want more people to know about them because it can be really, it can give people hope who have thought that that was a path that they couldn't go down, but there is a way.
Yeah, being a faculty at NYU, which is one of the largest international student school, I have to ask this question I get asked all the time. Students who really graduate, they get an OPT. What are their options to secure a longer stay and find an employment? What is some of the advice for the students on OPT?
Yeah, that's great. I work with a lot of international students from Stanford and Berkeley, and they're so inspiring and they're so determined. And so there's that standard path that probably many of the people in the audience have been down, which is, you graduate, you get OPT, you get STEM OPT, you do on-campus recruiting in the last year of your bachelor's or master's or PhD program, hoping that a big company will offer you a job before you graduate. If they do, you hope that they put you in the H-1B lottery before you graduate and in your year of OPT and your years of STEM OPT. So that's really the common path. And then people are waiting for companies to sponsor them for green cards. But there are other routes as well, like depending on if you don't have a lot of travel plans and you're in the United States, you could theoretically start your green card process for yourself before you even graduate from university. Lots of MBA students I know, or PhD students I know, can be kind of tricky because of the horrible backlogs for green cards for people subject to the India and China categories on the visa bulletin. But For people from other countries, they could self-petition an EB2 NIW and file a concurrent adjustment of status application before they even graduate and be on track to get their own work permit and own green card right out of school. For a lot of my clients born in India and China who are entrepreneurs, they create startups on OPT, and we set it up so they can legally keep working there on STEM OPT. And all the while, as they're building their product and selling their technologies, they're checking off those O1 accomplishments and then using the O1 as a stepping stone to get the EB1A Extraordinary Ability Green Card down the road. So, you know, as a mom of 2 little kids, it boggles my mind that the advice for so many mothers of brilliant, you know, immigrants has got to be something like, well, you know, it's nice that you got a PhD, honey, but you should marry an American. So I just want people to know there's more options than that, for sure.
So continuing my ambitious journey, I have lots of questions, and I'll try to see as many as we can. And I know sometimes there is not a short legal answer, but I'm going to shoot right at you.
Okay.
What are the implications of being laid off while being outside the US and visiting home country for a visa stamping? Is re-entry permitted immediately if it is within 60 days of unemployment window?
No, you shouldn't come back in until you find another job. I am so sorry. And if you're in this situation, I know a Wall Street Journal reporter who would like to write about your story. So please let me know. There are many people in this situation. You should not, when you're coming in, showing that H-1B at the border, you're saying, hey, I have a valid job offer. I'm coming in to legally work. The grace period only applies for people who are in the States. It's a Homeland Security regulation, not a State Department regulation. I bet people have gotten away with this, but I think that if the government were paying attention, they could legitimately accuse somebody of fraud in that situation, which is a 10-year ban. So I think it's safest, if you get your visa stamp, to wait, and if it's an H-1B, get a new employer to sponsor you, or come in on a B1, B2, and then do a change of status after you arrive.
Got it. Okay, another question. If I'm currently on E3 visa, work visa for Australian citizen, which is a non-immigrant intent visa, can my employer file for the permanent resident, which is conflicting to my current visa? Can USCIS question my intent to stay here and not renew my E3 when it comes to renewal?
Yeah. So I've done that before for somebody who decided long after they arrived on E3 or TN that they wanted to do the green card, and they had no travel plans, and they were able to maintain their status the whole time while they were waiting for the green card. That worked a few years ago when green card processing times were shorter. What most employers do to protect their employees in this situation is put the people in the H-1B lottery, where, you know, we're doing that right now. So it would be safer if your employer put you in the H-1B lottery first and then started the green card process later.
Okay, will the current H-1B be canceled, abandoned after switching to B2?
You will no longer be in H-1B status, but the H-1B visa foil stamped into your passport at the consulate should not be affected. And so if you then get an I-797C approval notice for a future I-129 H-1B petition from another company, and you want to leave and come back in, and you still have that valid H-1B multi-entry visa in your passport from the old company, you should be able to use the old visa and the new approval notice to come back in, and that should work.
Okay. Would the change on the status advice also apply to F1 students with an expiring OPT?
If you're an F1 student and you're at the end of your last year of OPT, first of all, apply for STEM OPT if you can. If you can't, a lot of students, so if you're already in F1 status and it's the end of your OPT, you can simply get a new I-20 from a new degree program and start at the new school without a change of status. There are master's programs that allow day one CPT to start working immediately. Please be cautious of those, as the Trump administration set up a fake school to trick international students. And many people ended up getting deported because they just blindly assumed that it was a legit school and they could enroll. So please make sure that if you're ever doing any sort of day one CPT program, that you've independently verified that the school meets the requirements. But the thing that international students on F1 can do, if let's say their employer, they don't get selected in the H-1B lottery and they're running out of time and they're trying to stay here and keep working, employers can sponsor people for H-1Bs without the lottery in a concurrent to H-1B setup, which we do with a nonprofit. So your first job would be for the nonprofit teaching US underserved, diverse college students on STEM-based project learning for 5 hours a week. You get an H-1B without the lottery, and then your employer can piggyback on a second concurrent 35 or 40 hour a week H-1B for full-time private employment. So there's several options there for F1 OPT students running out of time.
Yeah, always seek professional legal advice. Can you also speak about the 60-day grace period? There is a confusion about, when does it start? Does it begin when the employer notifies you of a layoff via email, or does it begin after the last day of payroll?
It's a very fact-dependent inquiry. And since the layoffs started happening in November, I've been very concerned about it. So the regulations say the 60-day grace period kicks in at the cessation of employment. They do not define the cessation of employment. The conservative definition would be, the day your Okta account gets canceled and you can no longer use your badge to enter the building or check your email, you are no longer working there. And there's some companies like Twitter that messed up their labor rules or something and had to keep paying everybody because they didn't provide ample notice. So those people were getting paychecks into January. So I know that just based on the breadth of humanity, that there will be people who will end up filing H-1B transfers using the 3 most recent pay stubs from very recently, but they stopped working more than 60 days ago. Talk to your company's immigration lawyer about whether they advise it for you. It might be safer to leave and re-enter if you have a valid multiple entry visa from another employer. I think that if USCIS is, sees like, oh, they were from XYZ company that had a bunch of layoffs on November 1st, so we're not going to use their February paychecks, then there's a chance that your H-1B could potentially be denied for change of status and maybe sent for consular processing. So you just want to get ahead of that with your next employer and be cautious. And if you're in that 60-day grace period, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to keep getting paychecks till day 90. Still, if you need to buy more time, still file your I-539 before the 60 days, not the date of the last paycheck if it's farther out.
Got it. Okay. On I-539, someone and they're saying that on B2 visa, would it be possible for the holder to travel abroad? What are your thoughts on K1 visa?
Okay, well, if you file an I-539 and then you travel abroad, you abandon the I-539. It's seeking a change of status, which is only valid while you're in the United States. And if you leave and you come back in, it resets everything. So you could alternatively go on a trip and come back on a trip and skip the I-539 if you already have a B1, B2 visa and simply travel. But you're going to have to be prepared to talk to the CBP officer at the airport or border about how, like, yes, I lived here for 15 years and I own a house, but really I'm only here for 6 months as a visitor. You need to be prepared to tell that as a compelling, authentic, true story for why this stay is temporary and why you're not going to overstay and why you're not going to work. And the K1, that is for, that's a fiance visa. If you are in a position to be looking at marrying a US citizen or lawful permanent resident and you're in the US, talk to a family immigration lawyer about doing an adjustment of status and maybe skip the whole K1 travel process, because that can take a really, really long time.
Okay, you're doing phenomenal, by the way. You have like artificial intelligence, right? H-1B a person transfer visa to H-4 EAD operator started business, or?
Yes, you can. And transfers to H-4 take a really long time, and so do those EADs potentially. So it can definitely buy you time, but you have to be careful to plan out when you can actually start working.
Okay, last question. What happens when you get laid off while you're an H-1B and have I-140 is approved? the grace period is still 60 days, or will it be more?
It's still 60 days. You keep your priority date, and you will need a new I-140 from a new company, which might involve perm, unless your I-485 has already been pending 180 days.
Okay, Sophie, you have done an amazing job, and I know there are so many more questions, and I think we probably have to do another series seminar, but I truly appreciate it, and I recommend everybody to get professional help because that's important. And do consider joining Ascend if anybody wants to do that. I'm going to leave my LinkedIn profile and contact me for being a part of Ascend. But Rupa, I give it back to you. Thanks so much. It was a very ambitious fireside chat, and Sophie really did do a great job.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sophie and Tariq, for fielding questions. I wasn't even answering the questions, just sort of passing them on, and it was rapid fire for sure. I am going to take the last few minutes to introduce a friend of mine. Henry is co-president for the Ascend Connecticut and Westchester chapter. He's had over 20 years of professional experience spanning corporate strategy, development, finance, and consulting across multiple companies such as 1010 Data, IBM, and Kearney. Passionate in sustainability solutions for planet Earth, he's launching a new career in climate tech startup with strategy, financial plan, and investor pitches. But that's not why we want to hear his story. We want to hear his story because he, similar to Kunjan, also has a personal story to share, and I'm going to turn it over to Henry.
Thank you so much, Rupa. Thank you, Sophie. You did an amazing job for answering all these questions, and many of the options I did not even know before. And all of those new visas I wasn't familiar before. So many years ago, and Tariq, wonderful job moderating the discussion. Thank you so much, and especially calling out for Ascend and so on. So many years ago, my wife and I were in similar situations, and we were both on H-1B visa, and my wife was going through perm sponsorship green card application through another employer. And I was looking for safer alternative myself. Actually, I actually applied for technical immigration to Canada because it could Canada could admit people on technical merits without employer. So I did, and I immigrated there and stayed in Windsor, Ontario for a few years, and actually worked in the Detroit, Michigan area, commuting through the Canadian bridge and the Canadian border each day for several years. Eventually, my wife and I actually got married, and my wife actually had a situation with employer got acquired by another company at the time, and the company's original headquarters was in Memphis, Tennessee. And there is some kind of labor tricks that if you change your employer's location, your H-1B or a perm need to start over again. But my wife was running out of her H-1B time, the 6-year limit on her H-1B. And we were really concerned that we may not be able to get the green card before the 6-year expires. So I applied for actually Canadian basically visa or immigration possibility, helping my wife to go to Canada with me together. Of course, the other alternative is going to go back to China and all that kind of things. So that's my story. But the point of my story is for H-1B visa holders who were affected by the layoffs, don't despair, and there are always hope, there are always options. When God closed one door, there's always another window open. And actually, when I look back at all of those up and downs and layoffs and the struggles over the years, all the setbacks and all the door closures, and became windows for more newer and better opportunities, but you don't know that until you look back in your life. So always have hope and always create your options. And there are options. And Sophie talked many of them, and there are more for you. Second call is for the corporate employers who are listening. Whether you are Ascend corporate partners or not, do consider hiring H-1B visa holders. And it's a great time to pick up a lot of precious technical talents that used to be in very short supply. And this is an opportunity for you to not only hire good talents, but also create loyalty, because people who got helped in such dire times, they will remain loyal for you for a long time. So if you haven't done that before, consider start doing it. The third call is for the Ascend members, the fellow Ascend members. If your company is open to doing H-1B visa transfers or hiring H-1Bs, do a referral, talk to them, check their resume, and talk to the potential candidates, and potentially do a referral if they fit certain backgrounds, certain jobs. Whatever goes around will come back around. This is a great time to help people in need. And this is what Ascend is about. So that's that. All the story from me. Get back to you, Rupa. Thank you.
Henry, thank you so much. Very well said indeed. I think we do need to consider the economic impact of all that's going on as well to the country at large. So, you know, there's different points of view from everyone concerned. And I think I really, really do appreciate you sharing that message of hope. I'm looking at the chat. There's a lot of people that it's resonating with. They really, you know, it's timely when you phrase it in a certain way. They need to hear that message, and then they need to get energized and go off and do something about it. So thank you so much to Kunjan and Henry for sharing your personal stories. It's never easy to admit to be in a place of vulnerability, and it's always a good idea to raise your hand and ask for help. Ascend absolutely believes in elevating the Pan-Asian professional. What would we do if we didn't do this, right? So in this time, this is what the media is all about. This is what's going on in all our companies. It is very much a relevant topic to consider. So thank you so much. Sophie Alcorn, I so appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for giving us your advice, your resources, your time. Sophie has shared with us some resources. I do want to say the USCIS is the single most, let's call it the source of truth, if you will, for the policies and the forms and all of that you need. We will be sharing some of it in a summary email after the event is wrapped up. We did record, so we'll be sharing snippets as well as appropriate, but thank you very much. And Tariq, thank you so much for moderating. I know this was not an easy one to field, but so appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.